this is how I feel right now. Now, it's not about auditing the Fed, but you got to admit that I think election integrity is almost more important than ending the Fed. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know, it feels for our readers, it feels like a long time coming. To me, it just made sense. There are bigger fish to fry, as our polling tells everyone, and we need to keep reminding them. The biggest issues on voters' minds was that they didn't feel like they were better off than they were, 4 years prior with Biden coming in. And that was manifested in abysmal polling levels for immigration, the economy, cost of living, and there was always this perception of fraud, and it started, I think, with the 2020 election. So what you've got is, um, Mark, can you take that guy down?
Come on. It's like one of the most famous GIFs ever.
Yeah, yeah. But you can put up anything else. Anyway. So look at since January 20th. What's he done? The immigration supercharged, the economy, getting rid of regulations and opening up energy, passing proclamations, national emergencies, get rid of gang members, all that, fighting with the courts. And he also found a great ally in Elon, who was willing to bring in Democrat. Remember, Elon was a Democrat, and like him, there were many Democratic billionaires who found, I think, about halfway through the Biden administration, that everything wasn't quite what they thought it would be. And, it was censorship, and there were backroom threats. Was it Mark Andreessen has a video out here of finally finding out that he himself and his businesses could be impacted. And you see um, you see the billionaires on their chat. This was all building into the election, and now Elon has put their arm around him and brought them into Doge. And Doge has got its early reputation of a bunch of kids who were doing things and they shouldn't, but behind the scenes was finally disclosed. A lot of guys who didn't need to work for a living ever again, and had an awful lot of clout and credibility worldwide with their products, and didn't need the assignment but took it anyway because of, I think, Elon's overseeing it. Those guys dug into these federal agencies and they found massive fraud. And that's what's got the Democratic Party. If I just can't even see it as a party anymore, but it's got those Democrats, the Kamala Harris Democrats, very, very worried, and they should be. So should Republicans who let this happen and maybe got bought off, probably got bought off. So those are the big, when people are like, I want arrests and I want to see, so and so frog marched. And we know this election was stolen, that election was stolen. Why isn't anything happening? I was just like, hey, first things first is to do the biggest things that you need to do in your first 100 days, get them done at the front end. And then I kept watching personnel, and personnel, you can't, without personnel, you can't execute. It's like a football team can't go out without someone playing quarterback. And you look at what was being fielded. It took a while to get Patel in, took and Bongino, and at DOJ, Bondi got in pretty quick, and she had the people that Trump had worked with in these spurious lawsuits that immediately came in. But there was one key person, that's Harmeet Dillon, and her arrival was delayed because it wasn't particularly, the biggest, but it took a while. And she was, so I was watching, and she was sworn in on Monday, and the next day, Tuesday, we saw Doge start to put out illegals, having social security numbers. Of course, they
Yeah.
have to have them so they can pay taxes. But now they were not only paying taxes, maybe, but they were on Medicaid, full benefits, and minimum pay. And these things were being attested to by these guys who were so rich that they had no benefit of actually having to say that. And I think it started in the
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
Not a political trick.
Right, right, and that's caused a lot of people to pay attention. And then Wednesday, so on Tuesday, you put this up because I thought it particularly interesting. This is Tuesday. Harmita's been sworn in, and she discovers her modest conference room, as I call it, and so she's on the job. And then Wednesday, Trump drops the bombs, starts to drop the bombs. He goes after Dominion's lawyer, law firm. He's gone after a lot of law firms, but this one was very specific. And and in the maybe not in the pronouncement, but someone from the White House said that they intimidated or blocked election activities in 2020. Wealthy off of it, very strong stuff. So and then
Yeah, let's react to some of this because we're rattling them off, but I want people to feel the palpable anger as
yeah,
we I mean some of this just is incredible. I think this is
well,
you
yeah,
gotta listen.
yeah, but that was Thursday. You're jumping ahead.
Oh, I'm skipping ahead.
Go
All right,
back
well
to
we
the
have this was Wednesday, right?
yeah, there it is. Florida's investigation. That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
President Trump orders DOJ investigation into law firm representing Dominion in 2020. The same law firm that probably deposed John Fawcett of the Great America Show, I'm guessing, election defamation cases. President Donald Trump on Wednesday signed a sweeping executive order launching a federal investigation and crackdown on the law firm Sussman and Godfrey LLP. The legal powerhouse behind Dominion Voting Systems' highly publicized 2020 election defamation lawsuits, including its 700 and almost 90 million settlement from Fox News. Man, that's crazy.
yeah.
So a lot of people like a lot of people talk about Dominion. I just wanted to get your reaction to this sentiment. Is that listen, I don't know who's to blame. I think we have to wait and see an investigation. But I think that there were probably legitimate reasons for them to bring these lawsuits, and that might be an unpopular opinion. Because like when I recall when Twitter got bought by Elon Musk, everybody hated Twitter. It was like, oh, Twitter censors, Twitter censors, Twitter censors. Well, when you see the actual Twitter files, it's a lot more complicated than everybody was simplifying it.
Mm.
And so I don't really know exactly where they're at in here, but it's
I
like this is yeah.
I had to rely on 40 years of news judgment when I saw those initial stories. Newsmax, Fox, and others had people on accusing Dominion and other machine companies of actually perpetrating the fraud. And they were so and they were so confident in doing that. It was way over their skis. And the networks relied on news. The president was saying that these companies did bad things, and they had guests on coming in and saying they did bad things, and votes were going channeling through Spain and into Germany and bouncing off the Matterhorn and coming back or whatever. And so that reliance on news and First Amendment um, turned into a Donnybrook over defamation. And it could have, I think, been avoided. I'm not sure. I think Murdoch got screwed moving for summary judgment in Delaware, where the political climate had changed, and the judge denied the inclusion of evidence from people that would have been favorable to Murdoch. Murdoch was basically forced to capitulate. He fired his lawyer, but he had to capitulate and
Yeah.
settle. But the overall thing I've been looking at is how Dominion and the other machine companies react to the vulnerabilities disclosed in their process. And the vulnerabilities were evident very early on, and they were evident even before 2020. And those were where I thought they would sue people who they thought defamed them, and they would address the vulnerabilities that were outlined specifically as we talked in our last Friday segment with the professor from the University of Michigan, who was trusted, and he said is this stuff is bad. You have to
Yeah.
fix it. They did nothing, as far as I'm concerned, except to debate that it wasn't bad and it didn't need to be fixed, and the tests that were run on it were, less than normal, or less than what would be found in a normal election situation. So instead of stepping up and saying we want the public to be, you know, satisfied and trust us, they didn't. As far as I can see, I've looked at their website. Maybe I'm wrong. They can show me whatever they want, but basically they said no, these don't affect it. You can trust us. So that led to years of the court battle that we described last Friday in Georgia, where the professor hacked the machine in front of the court using the defendant's counsel's pen and changed votes. Wasn't good. So all that's been going on, but this thing that we're looking at here on the screen is basically Trump taking a shot from high above, the 30,000-foot shot from the Oval, declaring the law firm a bad operator, a bad actor, and taking away rights to practice in certain areas that require federal consent and federal approval. And he did this one last. Okay, as far as I know, he even did Perkins Coie before this one.
Yeah.
So that felt very much like, I keep coming back. What was the trigger? Well, the trigger was all the big things, and most importantly, the tariffs and everything that he had teed up for the first part of April, because he knew that would take the country through the hoops, and it did. But as soon as that was over, this stuff appears to be, stacked and waiting, and he started firing off the Dominion
Yeah.
lawyer here, and then in the same Oval Office signing ceremony, he goes after Chris Krebs. So we can get to that.
Yeah. Well, I want to dwell on this a little bit longer. So that's interesting. So I wonder, he didn't say, "Hey, here's executive order number 13XXX, and it has all of the law firms that I'm going to be stripping security clearances of." He has kind of trickled them out, and this one is the latest. And so I wonder if, there's backroom conversations, or if it was literally, "Hey, let's save the Dominion one for last." I don't know.
Well, again, I started with Monday's swearing in of Harmeet. So that's the Civil Rights Division, and I'm not a lawyer, but apparently that's where, hold on, that's where this kind of activity would be reported um, in that division.
And you got a phone call, and I got attacked by a Jack Russell both at the same time. It's
Okay,
hilarious.
we both, I pulled the wire out of that one. So that was my peg for this all was to have her in there if she's going to be the quarterback. I don't know, but she has a good background in all of this, and she knows the states very well, so the laws, etc. So here's Dominion's lawyer getting nuked from above, and then, as I said, same Oval Office session, Chris Krebs.
Yeah. This and this is a nuking. My understanding is with these DC based firms or firms that do a lot of business with the government, once you have your security clearances revoked, you might as well like pack up. Is what I've heard from multiple people. I don't know how true that is, but
Yeah.
um, but I applaud it. I think it's absolutely great. All right, let's do the Chris Krebs one then. So this came out. So you're saying this was the same session? I want to hear this. I only heard it once. I like to listen to these things like 5 times. So this is for the audience too.
Christopher Krebs, the former head of CISA. This is a man who weaponized his position against free speech in the election context, in the context of COVID-19.
Oh.
The presidential memorandum to the one you just signed.
Oh, what are we doing here?
All right, Mark, it's got a couple glitches.
Further instructs your Department of Justice, other aspects of your government, to investigate some of the malign acts that he participated in while he was still head of CISA.
This is another one. I don't know that I met him. I'm sure I met him, but I didn't know him. And he came out right after the election, which was a rigged election, badly rigged election. We did phenomenally in that election. Look what happened to our country because of it. Open borders, millions of people coming into our country. Russia and Ukraine, that would have never happened. October 7th would have never happened. Afghanistan, the way that they withdrew, with 13 dead, but so many killed, actually. I mean, so many killed outside of the 13 soldiers, hundreds of people killed. And maybe, I don't know, never mentioned, but I mentioned it, 42 or 43 people so badly injured, the legs, the arms, blown off, the face. And this is all because of an incompetent group of people that preceded us. And that would have never happened. And this guy Krebs was saying, oh, the election was great, it was great. Well, it's been proven that it was not only not great. When you look at all these lawyers and law firms that are signing, giving us hundreds of millions of dollars, it was proven by so many different ways in so many different forms, from the legislatures not approving to the...
Yeah, well, it's hiccuping, but pretty, yeah, definitely called him out there. Mr. Safest, most secure election in history.
Yeah. No, it extraordinarily, not only this part, but also there were White House, media people releasing more harsher criticism. I captured some of those comments for our readers in the Twitter feed, and so it was very clear that this was the throwdown going after Krebs. CISA has always been one of my most favorite targets for the coordinator's role of 2020. And because of its unique position astride the intelligence apparatus of the country. It's also Emerald Robinson's favorite. In fact, she has sources inside, not CISA, but inside the government, who are pointing her at CISA as being in the lead role of coordinating the common plan of 2020.
Has she been updating that election integrity thread yet?
I didn't look today. No, she was shut down because her sources are so good that they did not want to get ahead of the administration. But this makes sense. Someone coordinated it, and this guy coming out right afterwards with that statement. And when you look at things like Liz Harrington has put up about his background and his views about the 2016 election and making sure it never happens again, well, I thought Hillary Clinton lost it without cheating or whatever. But then in 2020, we find, or it's really Stephen Miller's America First law firm found, that through dragging CISA through court, etc., they extracted documentation that showed that CISA knew perfectly well that people could safely vote during the pandemic. There was no reason that voting in person was dangerous in any way, shape, or form. But once discovering that, CISA ignored it, buried it, and acted like they had never heard it. And that kind of documentation was devastating because there was always something else was going on, which was the mail ballots were being created. We know about the order that was placed for the machines that had to be way back there at the beginning before anyone thought that there would possibly be a reason not to go to the polls in November. And those machines were ordered, and someone told them to put in those orders, those independent, election printers who run on a very thin margin, spent millions of dollars because they were assured by someone that
Yep.
mail ballots would be acceptable throughout the entire country. And there's a coordinating role. So
You should tweet about that again today, Ted. It's been a long time since I've heard that, and I think you're the only one that's really been banging on that drum, to be honest with you.
Yeah, because in the media business, everything used to be on print, so you had to know print, and you had to know these kind of things and how printing works, and it's a terrible business. It's very very thin margin, plenty of competitors, and it's a mess. We would buy newspapers, for example, and if they had a printing operation, we would always sell it out, or contract it out and get rid of it to someone who wanted to be in the printing business because it wasn't a great business. So anyway, there had to be some kind of central coordinator of this to pre-plan it. We also know that the post office stopped the mail cover program, which is taking pictures of everything that goes through first class, I think, and maybe all mail, and keeping those records for a very long time. They changed that process to a very short one, 30 days, 60 days, and then they deleted the records, and then they started it after the election had run and went back to what it was before. And to do that, we find out that they had to have a federal judge involved, that guy in Washington who was so bad to General Flynn. No reason to do that. So there were a lot of signs that there was a federal aspect to the 2020 election fraud, that some role had to be played. And this CISA is where he was the head of, and he was so glib after the election that it made no sense, because there were obviously people yelling in all the battleground states, Georgia, Detroit. They had seen things that had gone wrong. They didn't trust this and that. And here he came out very early on and just said it's the most secure in American history. That was stupid of him to do that, but that is indicative of the confidence that I think this crew had. So,
well, stupid or smart, I mean, it was a very powerful tool. I pulled this up quick,
Let me
and
ask
I'll
for
tell you
your
where I got
reaction
it.
to some of the vote fraud that the president and his team have been alleging. Votes tabulated in foreign countries.
So all votes in the United States of America are counted in the United States of America. I don't understand this claim. All votes in the United States of America are counted in the United States of America, period.
Voting machines corrupted by mysterious actors in Venezuela.
So again, there's no evidence that any machine that I'm aware of has been manipulated by a foreign power, period.
Communist money from China and Cuba used to influence the election.
Look, I think we can go on and on with all the farcical claims that alleging interference in the 2020 election, but the proof is in the ballots. The recounts are consistent with
This, I mean, all the words, it's just like perfect op.
yeah.
This is November 29th. Everybody's upset. They're passing around memes showing the little red and blue chart. They're passing around little PDFs of the 19 bellwethers that went Trump and somehow Biden won. And then it comes on, and this is like the same tactics. They pick the most ridiculous ones first, and then they mischaracterize them, and they allow the guy to call it farcical, and I'm above these, and we don't need to relitigate this stuff. And oh, it's been counted again. And then they ran with this for 4 years based on like this and a couple other things. And the American voter said no, like, this is not good enough.
our polling said no, they weren't buying any of it. There's something I think it's something I learned from Robert Barnes, the attorney, and he specifically was directing it at the Arizona court system. But Mark, the old standard used to be in courts that if there is any question of the integrity of an election, you freeze everything, you investigate that, and most of the time, you know that you're not, if there is something really going on, you are going to rerun the election. That's the standard. But what happened in this election? All the black robes dismissed the cases that they never wanted to get into their court on standing. We just had that happen in Georgia 2 weeks ago. This woman spent 8 years and then discovered that there was no standing for the plaintiffs. So that also is a common plan or a common thesis in the judicial branch. You don't touch these cases.
Yeah.
And that is completely different than settled law in many of the jurisdictions for decades prior to this election. And the voters have to believe that their vote, whatever they're voting for, counts. And if they don't, then the judicial system has to step in and rectify that. And they didn't. And they ran. That was another tell that there was a
Yeah.
You
Well,
got
I've
that?
heard that SCOTUS considers these election issues to be a state's problem, and then I'm presuming that the states don't want to get involved in something that is a federal election, and so it's an awful
No.
convenient way for them to duck
Well,
responsibility. You know,
SCOTUS got so burned with the hanging chads in Florida that they never want to see another one of these cases. They're cowards. All right, they're just cowards because they're paid the big money, which isn't, but they took the big jobs to do big things. This case came to them, the current Supreme Court, through Carrie Lake and the technical experts that looked at the machines in Maricopa County found malware or two versions of Dominion software when only one should be there. And they also found a compiler. What a compiler was doing there illegally, they couldn't tell. It did something, but it shouldn't have been there. That was put into a case that was submitted to this Supreme Court. They declined to hear it. They didn't want to know nothing. All right. So the whole judicial branch is poisoned. It's not the same as it was before when the voter, most important person in America is the citizen, and the citizen's vote is the most important thing. That's the whole democracy. And republic is surrounded. That's it. So the judicial branch has got some real issues here. What are you pointing at Emerald for here?
oh, I'm saying this is where I found that link, but people should go to Emerald, and this is my plea for everybody to take a white pill, not a black pill. Is that if you look at Emerald Robinson's feed and just look for CISA or Krebs, you're going to be rewarded. It's well worth your time because she's been on this topic. Like here's her in November, like dumping on this guy. She's been on him the whole time. She had this really incredible tweet. Oh, did you ever figure out that Chad Wolf hired his best friend Chris Krebs to run CISA out of DHS? That it was working with Democrat orgs on the 2024 election during the Trump administration? Probably not, since Chad Wolf is working at the America First Policy Institute right now. So she's not concerned about losing friends. But what she's been on CISA for 4 years solid. And as you mentioned, she has like good sources. And she's putting out this massive election integrity thread bit by bit. And I talked to her like 2 weeks ago and she said, listen, I can't tell the whole story yet, My sources say it's under embargo. Things are happening. And then she implied that she knows two individuals who are likely already, under confinement of some type. And that also it's like, I mean, all over CISA and Krebs, Harmeet Dillon gets in there a day or two later, they're in the crosshairs.
Right. Right. Well, that's why I wanted to give our readers a little timeline: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week. Because
Yeah.
here we are sitting on Friday and discussing it because it's finally, it's finally moved forward. And I don't blame the Trump administration one iota, unless you have the people available to handle this stuff at the very highest level. You
Yeah.
don't make a misstep. So
Yeah, I think it's planned. And let's all remind viewers as well that Emerald Robinson, if you're not familiar, is employed by the person who's probably spent more money than anybody else on election integrity.
crazy man.
Yeah, crazy man.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it looks like he's getting vindicated.
Yeah. It was pretty evident he would be eventually, the way he was being handled. So, but Mark, we didn't even get to Thursday, because Thursday is the following day after Krebs and the Dominion lawyer. On Thursday was the cabinet meeting. And in the cabinet meeting, and I'm sure you've got that clip somewhere.
I think I got rid of it in order to. Here it is. I got rid of it to go to Emerald's feed. Here we go. Should I roll this one?
Yeah.
Yep, it's a big deal. Thank you very much. Great job you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Thanks to your leadership and setting the mandate of transparency and accountability across the U.S. government. I'm bringing that transparency and accountability to the intelligence community, first and foremost, to make sure that you and your cabinet have that real-time, relevant, apolitical, objective intelligence to best inform, whether it's negotiations for peace, negotiations around tariffs, the great work that you are leading around the cabinet today. Secondly, working with Department of Homeland Security and the FBI to increase our information sharing to achieve your goal of countering the narcotic trafficking and our ability to go after cartels now designated as foreign terrorists. I met with the National Sheriff's Association this week, being able to work to make sure that the information that they are getting on the ground, that local law enforcement is getting on the ground, is being fed back up through to our National Counterterrorism Center, and that we have all of the federal agencies, state and local law enforcement all on the same page as we are working to make our country safe again. And lastly, sir, as you know, declassification and rooting out weaponization, politicization of the intelligence community is a huge priority. You know more than anyone else the very dangerous and negative consequences of that. I've got a long list of things that we're investigating. We have the best of the best going after this. Election integrity being one of them. We have evidence of how these electronic voting systems have been vulnerable to hackers for a very long time and vulnerable to exploitation to manipulate the results of the votes being cast, which further drives forward your mandate to bring about paper ballots across the country so that voters can have faith in the integrity of our elections. And lastly, we've been scanning. I've had over 100 people working around the clock to scan the paper around RFK.
Yeah, all right. So then she goes into the RFK stuff.
Yep.
Stunning.
Yeah, she's obviously reading off a list of topics to cover, and that was specifically sitting right there in the middle of the pack. It's very deliberate. So again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. This is Thursday, and the big fireworks of the tariffs are behind him, and he's right on it. And Harmeet is at DOJ. So this is how you would start if you were prudent. You would get a quarterback, and you would field the team.
Yeah. Now, I'm not a legal strategician. What is the word? I can't. I had too much beer last night. But I think there is a profound amount of deck plate level fraud. And I think that there are probably a lot of people that who should be concerned right now. But what's fascinating to me is that, well, they don't have like a 300 person FBI RICO team out there. They went for the machines. And I think Trump specifically, personally, has said he's not a machine guy, right? I think
Right.
he said that. But isn't not smart. If I was one of these machine companies, my very first defense would be, well, sorry, we did our best. Here's all the actions that we do to protect these things. And oh, it's being corrupted locally. And I would try and shift blame to those people.
Yeah, I don't see them. I haven't looked at Dominion in a month, but every time through the past 4 years, they would basically just knock down any concerns and just deny. It was just a legal type strategy where they should have been engaging voters and assuring them that they had found something, fixed something, and this, that. No. It just that was not it, and that worried me because a machine can count paper faster than humans if you trust it, but trust was as our survey show, we got up to what 66% or something on the election 2024 would be rigged, and the 2020 election we made it up to 62% who thought cheating affected the results. So that's an enormous amount of the U.S. Voting population who would not be cowed by mainstream media or legacy media shouting them down. They were shouted down about the vaccine. They were shouted down about everything, and it all turned out to be very bad for the voters. But
Yeah.
uh, this has been quite a week, and now you've got um, you've got the question is, where do they move next? And I put out a thesis this week under tea leaves that, and I've done this same thesis before because it was triggered by Mark Zuckerberg's second and unannounced visit to Mar-a-Lago last year. You would find in this case that after Trump's victory was assured, and it was assured pretty quickly, that people who had a lot to give and were worried about long jail sentences would
Oh,
be passed to Mar-a-Lago to try and get a top position in, let's say, the national fraud or the individual battleground states frauds, and they would be very willing to bring evidence and give evidence of what happened, and I think that they beat a path to try and reduce their personal impact, and I think that happened. I think that's Mark Zuckerberg has many irons in the fire, and a lot of people are criticizing him for like outrageous things and censorship and whatever. But I don't think Mark Zuckerberg wanted to spend 400 and some odd $1 million. I think he was told he had to,
mm.
and he resented that, and he was blamed for election interference, and he knew that he didn't go willingly to that level and to that prominence of personally writing the checks and being, responsible for it. And I think he went and said to Trump, "I'll show you who did it. I'll show you what they threatened me with. I'll show you what I did, and I'll show you what I think you need to know." And that's why he went back not once, not twice, but has had three, at least, that I know of, private meetings with Trump. The second one being when Mark Zuckerberg gets off a plane wearing a suit and tie, something's weird. And
Yeah.
that's what the New York Post captured on the tarmac at West Palm Beach. So, and the final meeting was at the White House. The subject is always undisclosed, but Zuckerberg would be a prime truth teller.
Well, we saw how the federal government dealt with old Twitter, and it was hostile. It was assertive, aggressive, invasive. As you know, they were weaponized against us.
Oh yeah.
And then Mark Zuckerberg did pay a personal price for this in public opinion. Here we have, this is a year after the 2020 election, and we asked, it has been reported that Zuckerberg spent hundreds of millions of dollars to influence the outcome of the 2020 presidential election, good or bad thing. 8% good, 70% bad. And Meta, I think we asked favorability too, had a pretty low favorability number. So
I remember this one. If you go over the Democrat column, it's 62% of Democrats thought it was a bad thing.
yeah.
Yep, my memory's right. Yeah, that was the
Well,
same.
they're not consistent on much, but they're pretty consistent when it comes to billionaires' money in elections.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, they don't like that, and it didn't matter that he had given all this. That is a Democrat signal right there. They want to
yeah.
win. They don't want to cheat. Some of them don't care how they win, but most of them care very much. But they
Well,
talk.
they're willing to ignore the evidence that says that they won by cheating. They don't like cheating, but they pretend they didn't. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think Trump. Just to finish my thesis, Trump is well versed, as his lawyers have recorded and deposed and gathered evidence as to what the common plan was and who the prime actors were. And so when you have a week that begins with, you know, begins with the tariffs and everybody's looking at that, but Harmeet is quietly sworn in. Then you've got the Medicaid fraud identified by Doge, by Elon and that other guy. And then you go right to Wednesday, Dominion lawyer sanctioned and Chris Krebs targeted for investigation. And then Tulsi talks about the machines yesterday. We're off to the races. So,
Well, I'll have to tell you, you called it too. We had this discussion many times, and you're just like, hey, wait and see. Wait and see. Harmeet's posting pictures of her knitting.
yeah,
This is all going to blow up at once.
Yeah.
You'll know when it happens.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You've been saying that for months.
She knows all this stuff, and there's so much stuff, that is common. It's already been disclosed, like the machines that in Arizona, that two versions of Dominion software when only one is certified and a compiler. They found a compiler in Georgia too, the same technical expert team, Cotton and Clay Parikh, found very common things going on with these machines, and they're not certified once those things have occurred. So Dominion's argument that everything was fine is defeated in the courts by having the case dismissed. But if the software isn't on the machine, is on the machine and it shouldn't be there, that's just a fact. And that fact was dismissed. It was a case not selected by the U.S. Supreme Court to investigate, and they left it to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit basically dismissed it again. Just all right, you found all this malware on these systems. Well, we don't care. Case dismissed.
Yeah, case dismissed.
That is bull, and that won't fly. So Harmeet knows all these, and she knows the attorneys who brought them. There's her knitting. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to prove that Ted called it, and this is not the first time he said it. But she's, December 15th here, months ago.
Yeah.
For those of you bored by my knitting content, sorry, it's the only type of commentary I'm posting at this time. Will change in the future.
Yeah. The only thing constant is change. I remember that very well. So
yeah, and I said that she's knitting the names of the election stealers into a giant scarf.
I don't know. But so we're off to the races. Trump has never wavered. That's the other thing that, in our comments is that what's he doing and why did Trump has never wavered. He has never said that the 2020 election was fair. He has always said it was a cheat. He's always said there's evidence. Question is, how is he going to bring that forth? He now has a vehicle, obviously from the Oval Office, but also in his Department of Justice, and there's a quarterback now at the Department of Justice. And for all of our commentators who will say on Monday morning, well, why hasn't something happened and someone been put in handcuffs? Well, chill out. It has to be done right. And you know what kind of judges these people are going to go in front of.
Yeah.
And so what you really, I think, need to do from a public opinion standpoint is expose the evidence widely and just irrefutable evidence of manufactured ballots and machines that have the wrong software, et cetera, et cetera. But tangible evidence is always better. Like this is a counterfeit. Like, how about the DOJ open up that warehouse on English Street in Atlanta and go in and get those 140,000 ballots and find out how many of them are counterfeit, how many of them are on the wrong paper or they are perfect ovals, et cetera. Well, the governor and the secretary of state, they could open the doors, but they won't. So somebody's got, grip on the justices. They've got a grip on politicians. And this is just not the way elections in America used to take place, because any whiff of scandal was enough to tip over everything, and there'd be a huge court fight, and they would, either settle for a few ballots being kicked out or rerun the election with much more observers, etc.
Well,
So,
I think it's just the oligarchy problem's gotten so bad that it's gotten to the point where there's no social mores that they won't like completely light on fire in order to maintain power, and that's how we got in this predicament, I guess. It's really gross.
well, one of the most fascinating things that Emerald intends to disclose is how Trump beat the 2024 cheat. Now, our friend Peter Bernegger came on and said they didn't do it in Wisconsin. We did. Volunteers surrounded these counting centers and had the
Yeah.
legal resources to stop ballots from coming in. And he also said, in fairness, he said there was a moment when it could have been a Donnybrook, could have people being physically thrown out and ballots brought in, and they could try and do a smash and grab, kind of thing, like they did in Pennsylvania. They kept the observers out, even though they had court orders. In fact, the Attorney General Pam Bondi standing on the sidewalk in video saying, "I got a court order, I can't get in." She'll never forget that. That's for sure. So there was a moment when they capitulated, the cheat gang capitulated and just let it happen. But I don't know that that's the solution nationally or just in Wisconsin. I don't know. But you and I were sweating it out on election night, Mark, because we had our number and we knew.
Oh yeah, it was going south there for a while.
Yeah, yeah, and we were watching Wisconsin, and Peter was tweeting from inside the precincts and or wards or whatever, central count in Milwaukee. So Trump pulled it out. The question is how. Emerald says she's going to tell her readers how it
Yeah, I'm
works.
sure it goes beyond what we've heard from Peter. I think there's an answer,
Well,
a bigger answer.
Peter also said there was a moment, and in that moment, there was a decision, and people in power decided not to try it. And that probably is the moment that Emerald's going to answer. What did they find out? What were they surprised with when they knew that they couldn't get away with it? They're going to try and make Harris the president and then use the Department of Justice to crush back on the people. But there was some moment, and we'll find out that, I think, in the future.
Hopefully someday. There's so many weird things. Remember that period after the election and before January 6th where it's like you had the head of like people talking about covert military operations and stuff like that. And then there's things that like make me scratch my head. So it's like, yeah, okay, Chad Wolf, I guess, did recommend Chris Krebs Chris Krebs was the inaugural CISA, so he was the first director, is my understanding.
Hmm.
And that's also the first time, allegedly, that CISA was involved in manipulating elections, right? And now I looked this up, and it's like, okay, who's the new guy? Trump has nominated Sean Planky. I don't know anything about him except he's a former U.S. Coast Guard officer. But it says here that Chris Krebs, this is Grok, look this up. Plinky's nomination has been widely praised by industry experts. Chris Krebs, CISA's first director, described him as a great pick with deep technical chops and a straightforward approach to leadership. Like, what is this?
Yeah, that's not encouraging, but let's not damn anyone without knowing them. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe Krebs was a fall guy. I mean, he obviously was out there spouting conspiracy theories about the 2016 election and how Russia,
Yeah,
that was definitely a little over the top.
yeah, and we know from our other discussions and your discussion with Tony Schaefer that Bill Barr spiked an active investigation into counterfeit ballot trafficking that our friends, the Clinton whistleblowers, have been suing the U.S. Postal Service for years, getting nowhere. I checked in with them. They're quietly encouraged by everything. They had no real update as to where their case is, but the fact that the Postmaster General is out and there's a new opportunity to look at those counterfeit ballot transports without being blocked is good as far as they're concerned. So this all had to start sometime. This was the week that it started, Mark.
Yeah. Well, we're not done yet. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
We got this Elon responding, they just want to cheat because what was it? 204 of 208 Democrats voted against the SAVE Act requiring a proof of citizenship in order to vote in federal elections.
Yeah. And I
Done.
showed polling, we have that polling for next week, but for the SAVE Act, but it passed. And we had 60 some odd percent, almost 2/3 of Democrats want people to only citizens to vote, and a majority of them, 50% by memory, want to have ID, that they think voters should have ID to vote. Those are Democrats, all right? So the fact that 4 Democrats crossed the line to fill in anything that Republicans couldn't come up with on the SAVE Act is a good sign.
Well, we have this. This is public, and it shows that is requiring a photo ID to vote reasonable measure to protect the integrity of elections. This is from just 2 months ago.
Yeah.
77% yes, and Democrats it's 69%. So they're yeah, sure, of course. And it's like every single one of the talking heads. It's like, oh, Jim Crow, oh, the too stupid, like just all this stuff.
Just ridiculous.
But yeah, but from April, I have these up. I just pain to share it, but our normal question: how important is it to prevent illegal immigrants from voting in the U.S. elections? It's like duh. Well, actually, 51% say very important. I would want that to be higher, but then 24% say somewhat. So that's 3/4, and 22% say not important. Democrats 66%, 2/3 say important. 35% very. So that's that's like they know they want it, but they don't want to say they love it because they know they'll get yelled at. Their like internal racist meter is yelling at them. But should Congress enact a law? It's like, yeah, duh, 64% to 26%. So a little less than reasonable measure, but it's like, well, laws, people are worried about Congress packing it full of 4,000 pages of work. I don't know.
Yeah.
50% of Democrats say, yeah, pass the SAVE Act. And only 4 of them voted for it.
Well, that's 4 at least. Usually
better than nothing. Yeah, they broke ranks. Those 4 are going to get cut off from like all campaign funding and like.
Right, and that's what I encouraged. I encouraged them, the Democrats, to run their own poll because because they should be able to, if they put the likely voter screen down, they should be able to match ours, showing a strong party approval for only U.S. citizens voting. So,
Yeah. Hey, they
yeah.
can use us because we poll for Democrats now, Ted. If
Oh,
you didn't,
I know, but you know, I'm just, I'm just used to the old adage, you know, that we're not fair, we're Republican leaning. Except when you nail the election of 2024 within 1% mark, then it's like they don't want to talk about that, but then they go back to your Republican leaning.
yeah, right,
When
right,
you and
leading.
Dave Fluff were saying the same thing, it's so ludicrous, you know. I can't.
Well, I'm confident saying that they're all left leaning, so
That's
that's
what you
fine.
say.
We
I
can
know.
agree to disagree.
Yeah, yeah. Some more than others. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Somebody put up in chat. So who is currently picking our cotton? Jasmine Crotchrock? What is the media? Why is the media not talking about such a disgusting, ignorant statement? And I put that up because I think it's a pretty good segue into where'd it go? This story here, which is the next item in election integrity happening because Representative Jasmine Crockett's now under FEC investigation over Act Blue campaign donations.
Yeah,
That's
our friend
incredible.
Peter Bernegger was at the very forefront of exposing this. James O'Keefe also went in and broke this, and it's finally coming into the into the Congress. I think Republicans, you know, it's a survival mode because where's this money coming from? And well, it ain't coming from little old lady who donates $20 once every 2 years and suddenly finds out she's donated $72,566. It's crazy.
Yeah. What's crazy? Well, so what I don't. Okay, so Peter Bernegger implied that Act Blue is under separate state investigations, and well, he implied that it was under a federal investigation. Now it's my words, not him. But this is an FEC investigation, not into Act Blue, but into Jasmine Crockett, coming from somebody in Texas, probably who made the complaint because I guess their husband, or like it was a small donation, like one, and they brought it to the FEC, and the FEC is like, "Oh yeah, we've been waiting for this." Is my read on this?
Well,
But they're to go after her though, and not a smurfing organization is interesting.
yeah, I think they can do two things at once. I don't follow any of this at all, but there was that FEC commissioner that Trump forced out. The woman was there for, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 years, and she wouldn't leave, and they
Oh yeah,
forced her out. And Trump also forced out a lot of these inspector generals at a lot of federal agencies. In other words, they were supposed to watch for improper things happening, and you could trust them, but things were happening anyway. And the Act Blue thing, the FEC, was completely nowhere to be found, and it had to be come up through election integrity guys like Bernegger and his crew. So
Ellen Weintraub, yeah, she's been there forever since like the late 2000s, I think,
right.
and she had almost a decade under which she could have investigated Act Blue for any one of these complaints. I'm sure they got some, you know.
Well, I think
And so
these people
yeah.
were positioned to protect the interests of wrongdoers. That's the problem. And of course, the hue and the cry that goes out when one of these career servants is fired almost leads you to say, well, why are you even noticing this? And legacy media does all the time when they see one of these gatekeepers essentially removed.
We gotta hope at some point enough of them are gone that there's a tipping point and
Well, I think what they
frees
didn't
up some
expect,
people, you know.
I don't think they expected the horsepower that Elon's Doge brought, and they were able to take these horrendously outdated computer systems and use their newer technology to sort data that was coming out of these beasts and put together links and flowcharts, etc., to show where the money went from, cushion to cushion across the pool table to the NGOs until it ended up in the pocket where it was ultimately going to go, and it was a pocket with partisan paint on it. So that, I think, surprised
Yeah.
them and scared them all. And I think
Yeah,
there's
USAID was a kill shot.
yes, yes, and Elon said it was because they were the first to absolutely ignore the orders of dispersing money to things, and it may have been true, or it may have been that Trump and the gang knew that this is the mother nest of a lot of this nefarious.
They knew. They were literally busting down the doors of USAID when Trump had his hand on the Bible. We're not, remember. They did. They were in there that night.
Were they?
They're like, I read it in an article. Like, that was the crown jewel, and they went for the jugular. That is the jugular.
Wow. Okay.
And again, I don't think. Let me caveat that. Obviously, the web of corruption is vast and far-reaching, and none of the actual pipelines of dollar distributions have been affected. But I think it's like, if you're fighting somebody bigger than you, right? It's got to be about the size of the fight in the dog. And I think that there was just complete and utter disarray when everybody's like, that was probably an unspoken rule of DC, that hands off of USAID, because this is this is how all the bread gets buttered, is my guess.
Yeah. Well, they hit the right spot, and so. But back to our subject, I don't want to overdo it today because we have more to go, Mark. But that's it. Once you got to Tulsi, speaking about the electronic voting machine companies on yesterday at the conference at the cabinet meeting, that was it. I mean, that's quite a week, and I think we're on our way. And I can't wait to see what next shoe falls and what direction it goes. I think we're well underway.
There's one more thing I'm going to bring up, and then I'm going to go to chat, and you can stick around or not. Some people might have questions for you, but there's one aspect of this that we've talked about a lot, nobody else has, is that Trump is getting serious about illegal aliens. And I thought, hey, back in December, if he just gets rid of 500,000 of the absolute worst criminals, then maybe it'll be fine. But everything is pointing to the fact that they are going scorched earth and trying to get these people to self-deport. And apparently what they're going to do is identify anybody that's an illegal alien in the Social Security database and kill them, so that they can't use that Social Security number for anything, getting financing, like applying for jobs,
Right.
bypassing E-Verify, getting credit cards, and then it's a 1-2 punch, because everybody wondered from last week, well, why is Alina Habba now the attorney for New Jersey, right?
Right.
Well, it's like, I think she was sent there to go after Phil Murphy as a very prominent target, who has created a sanctuary state and has been very vocal about fighting the federal government about immigration.
Yeah.
And I think this is another one where it's part of the plan, and they're going after it. And I think we're going to see millions of people leave. Yeah.
There's another aspect that readers shouldn't forget. One of the first things that the FBI and the military, the U.S. military, because they were designated as terrorists, are the cartels, and targeting the cartels, arresting cartel leaders, and now I believe actually delivering bombs onto the foreheads in Mexico of cartel leaders.
Look at you with the Marine Corps saying.
Yeah, well, there's a thing. It comes back to this when you talked about the Social Security Administration and cutting them off. these people have to pay the cartels for their transport, for the safe passage into the United States. They owe $10,000. They owe serious money, and they were counting on getting money from the U.S. government, getting a job, taking it from an American who didn't want it or did want it, whatever. And those remittances are what keeps them paying on their payment plan, and it keeps their family back in their home country from being assassinated to incentivize them to keep paying. Now, if Trump cuts off
Wow.
money through the Social Security, then he has to neutralize the cartel's ability to intimidate these people if he wants to deport them in an orderly way. And so this is the most important hunting expedition that the U.S. military could do, is to neutralize the cartel's ability to intimidate these people from going home.
That's fascinating. I had never really thought about that connection. That
It was talked about by one of Elon's billionaires. I forget his name, but he's the guy, the Spanish name, but he's American. And he said, I went down there.
yeah,
And
I'll look. Yeah.
they've all got a $10,000 bogey or more.
Wow.
And you don't make your payment, someone in your home country dies, like your mother. So
Well, that makes remittances make a lot more sense. You know what I mean? I always thought it was somebody trying to support their family from, back in India or whatever. But no, it's probably just human trafficking. Sure.
yeah, they have to do both. So
I forget where I heard it, but I heard that the hit to cartel top line is so bad that they're now trying to retool into distributing fentanyl more heavily in Europe. I forget where I heard that, but
okay, well,
it fits.
that to neutralize their ability to terrorize the illegal immigrants, that's where the declaration of them as terrorists comes from. It allows full U.S. military. I mean, you're a military guy. You know that would mean you would be able to use the U.S. military in this way.
Yeah. I just looked it up, and apparently remittances to Mexico are roughly 4% of their gross domestic product.
Yeah.
What an industry.
These remittances, Mark, a lot of these are not Mexicans. There are plenty of Mexicans here also, but these are other South American countries and countries.
Oh, like Venezuela.
I'm really worried about the Chinese nationals, the young men who disappeared into the heartland. They may have an alternative source of income, and they may have paid no smuggler anything.
Well, it's been talked about forever how many former Chinese military in the resume usually is like associated with the CCP individuals there are taking advantage of H-1B and student visas. I think I had a Chinese spy in my business school learning team. I think they've been doing it for decades, and they're at every level of corporations. So
right.
Basically, Trump is at war with everybody who was probably bribing politicians. Like, that's what it ultimately comes down to, right? Is
Yep.
Kind of sad and gross, but there it is.
Yep.
If you've learned something, please follow us at rasmussenreports.com, Rasmussen_poll at Twitter. Follow us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Mark_R_Mitchell at Twitter. And thanks for watching.